I would like to speak to you on the topic of Jesus the winemaker. And the text is a text from John, the 2nd chapter, verse 1 to 11, the story of the wedding festival in Cana. Although I'm very glad to be back in Seoul, I do miss the warm and even hot days I spent in South Africa during the past Christmas season. It was also heartwarming to have spent Christmas with my family and to welcome a new member to the Reiners clan, my new daughter-in-law. Well, that was actually the reason I went to South Africa this Christmas to officiate the wedding of Matt and Liana. It was a beautiful day, and being surrounded by family, some whom I haven't seen for ages, and close friends, it was the ideal time to celebrate the getting together of two young people taking their first steps into their new lives. There weren't many people, just enough, I guess. As you are well aware, wedding invitations are becoming very expensive. Mind you, they're nothing compared to the expense of weddings in the days of Jesus. Well, back then, you had to entertain your guests for a whole week. And if you forgot to invite a friend or a relative, well, they turn up anyway. And probably lots of people who you didn't realize who were your friends. In a small village, you'd probably find that everyone is suddenly your friend, even your neighbor who irritates you. But so you have to stock up enough food and wine and music and small talk, because more people will come and they will stay for longer than you planned, and sometimes even they will bring their friends and their families. So if you were there, I guess you had quite a lot of stress on your hands. Now, this wedding in Cana, it seems that Mary was a very important person on the guest list. Maybe because they knew her so well, or maybe she's one of those people that just are just very busy. She makes herself very useful. So anyway, when disaster struck, she turned to Jesus. And that was when the wine suddenly was up. No wine. And for them, it was a huge disaster. So what she did was, she turned to Jesus. He wasn't very keen to do anything. It was as if he was keeping his head down a little bit. So he said to his mother, well, it's not my time. But she was insisting and telling the stewards, well, you just do whatever he says. Well, he did it. There was no wine from the one moment, disaster. There were all these jars. And it wasn't clay pots, it was stone jars, big. Just think of it, how enormous it was, that miracle. I mean, they were the stone pots, 100 liters each. And if you do your calculations, 6 stone jars, 100 liters each, you get 800 bottles of wine. Can you imagine that? What a party gift. 800 bottles of good wine. Maybe the servants thought, was this real wine? Well, they spent hours hauling buckets of water and pouring them into these jars, and now they were asked to pour them into the wine cups for the guests. Well, were the guests going to spit it out in their faces, or what are they going to do? Everyone wanted refills because the wine ran out some time ago. And the first guests to be served were the most important ones. Now, in every marriage festival, there was usually a professional organizer in the group. In the village festivals, there was the chief guest, maybe an important person who'd say grace, who would give some speeches, and generally preside looking very important. Well, he had to taste it first. And everyone was sort of anxious. What is he going to say? Especially the servants, because they poured water. They didn't know that it was actually real wine. So the shout came out, excellent wine. And everybody was sighing with relief. Thank goodness, it's wine, not water. You see, in this story, there's a focus on wine. If I read about the Jewish festivals and the Jewish religious festivals and their wedding festivals, wine plays a very important role in that. In the wedding of Matt and Liana, we did a Jewish kind of wedding, and the main feature there was the wine. And the story was that God makes wine. God takes two bunches of grapes, put it together, making wine, and that is their life together. Winemaking in Israel dates back at least 2,000 years before the Romans occupied the region, and possibly thousands of years before that. And hundreds of wine presses have been uncovered and excavated throughout modern Israel. So wine was very much an integral part of the life of Israel. It was a symbol of their freedom from bondage. And it was a necessity in every Jewish religious ceremony. It's been said that wine is at the heart of the Jewish tradition. Most people in Israel were farmers. They grew wheat, they grew olives, they tended orchards, herded goats, sheep, and cattle, and grew grapes. We see signs of wine all over the Bible. And it was a part of their daily existence. In the Old Testament, it's only the book of Jonah that has no reference to either wine or the vine. One thing that is very certain there, another reason they used wine was because water were mostly contaminated. It wasn't good to just drink water as it is, especially in settlements, around settlements where there were no sanitation. And water was in short supply during droughts. So they drank wine. They quenched their thirst and dilute the wine then with water. It kept them healthy, they said. So in the Bible we find a lot of references to wine. In the Old Testament we find the reference of wine to Noah. After the flood, he planted a vineyard. Well, he pushed it too far. He got drunk and he passed out, according to Genesis 9. But we also read about Moses. When he sent spies into the promised land, they brought back grapes. In Ecclesiastes, we find also the praise for wine several times. It talks about wine that brings joy, wine and celebration. In the Psalms, Psalms 104, we see the celebration of the natural wonders of the world. Wine is one of them. So wine was a part of their life, of their culture. Now there's a huge debate going on if it was alcoholic wine or non-alcoholic wine. We're not going to talk about that now. But the whole story here is about wine was very much part of their lives. They knew the art of making wine. It was part of something they grew up with. You see, grapevines grow best on rocky hills with poor soil, allowing the Israelites to use the valleys for growing grain. And the slopes ensured good drainage and captured the sunlight, while breezes cooled the vines. So here, Israel was a fantastic place to plant vineyards. Wine presses were carved out of the limestone bedrock near the vineyards so the farmers could crush the grapes as soon as they were picked. It was a simple operation to make wine. You grow the grapes, you get the grapes from the vine in the limestone bedrock in that wine press, and then it was a simple operation. They crushed the grapes in a shallow flat crush pad with their feet, something they did until very recently. And the juice then flowed downhill into a fermentation pit. Fermentation was done in the open air for at least a week, during which dust and dirt could mix with the wine, giving new meaning to terroir. So the juice bubbled and throated in the fermentation pit. Now, fermentation preserves the juice, allowing it to be stored for long periods without spoiling. And once the juice stopped bubbling, the farmers simply scooped the fermented wine into goat skins directly from the fermentation pit. Now, we all know that grapes are really perishable. Their skins are very thin, and lacking refrigeration, they rot quickly once harvested in a hot climate. That's why you cannot really transport grapes for a far distance, because it will rot, especially in very hot summers like we get in Israel. But it's all just to say that wine was very much a part of this society. Maybe you can ask the question, but so what? Why are we talking about wine, and why are we talking about this here at the beginning of 2013? At the beginning of this new year, a year that we don't know what is going to happen. A year that we are standing right at the entrance, as if we're standing at the entrance of a new building, the gates of a new path. We don't know what's going to happen. So what has wine to do with the new year? Let me tell you how I see it and what I get from here. Jesus is here portrayed as the maker of wine. Later in John, he uses that same metaphor for my Father is the winemaker. My Father is the one that sits and he looks at the wine, at the whole vine. So it's very much as Jesus, the winemaker. You see, in Jewish tradition, and this is very important, they add value, or they give a value to everything. Everything has money value. And if they look at food, they look at something like a banana, and they said banana degrades in value. Banana hasn't got that much value. If you take one banana and you add another banana and you crush it and you make some banana juice, well, it doesn't increase in value. The only fruit that increases in value is grapes. If you take 2 bunches of grapes and you crush them, you fermented them, and you make wine, that increases its value. That is one of the most important things you can do with fruit, because it can stay for a long time. We know that wine has a lot of value. Old wine, if you go and you buy 1852 bottle of wine, that will cost you a lot of money. And so they say it increases the value. And I think Jesus understood something of that. And I think the Bible understood something of that. So if we stand here at the beginning of 2013, I want to say this to you, brothers and sisters. God is making wine. And God is making wine of your life. And God is busy doing something very peculiar and something very miraculous with your life. The first application here is this. Wine is produced through a process beginning by planting a vineyard with a chosen grape variety in the right soil. The winemaker knows the soil. That's the first thing. Now, I told you that they used to plant the vine in the rocky mountainous area. Maybe we don't really like the area, the Rocky Mountains. Now, each one of us finds ourselves somewhere planted. It might be the rockiest area or place you have ever been in. And you might ask yourself the question, Lord, you've put me here, and look at the rocks. Look at my surroundings. Lord, I would have done much better if you have planted me down there in the valley, in the lush green. Why this place? Why did you take me from where I was to here? Why this place? The impossible demands, the people you might not get along with, the rocks you have to deal with, the wind, the snow. Lord, why have you planted me here? We don't always like the place where God has planted us. We don't always understand it. We don't always understand the rocks, the surroundings, the temptations, the difficulties. But I want to tell you this afternoon, remember one thing: God is busy making wine. Something special. He is increasing your value. And this is also part of 2013. We don't know what's going to happen. We just see the immediate. God's making wine. He's not making Coca-Cola. He's not making something cheap. He's making wine. The second, weather plays a very important part in the quality of wine. Wine needs the right amount of sunshine and rainfall. You know, we cannot do anything about the weather. Here in Korea, we're experiencing one of the coldest winters I can remember. In South Africa, they're experiencing one of the hottest summers ever. It's nothing strange to have 40 degrees Celsius. For the wine and for the vine, the weather is really important. You see, during 2013, you and I will experience storms. That's a bad news. You will experience storms. You will experience snow. You will experience the bad times. It will come. But thank God, you will experience sunshine. You cannot really change that. There are things that you can change. There are things you cannot change. That's one of the things you really don't have much control about. But remember, God's making wine. He's making wine. So when the sunshine comes, He's making wine. He's preparing the wine. When the wind comes, when the snow comes, when the storm comes, when the wind comes, and it's cold, you see, God is sending you and me the right experiences. And that's the weather, as I see it. The winemaking process involves the crushing of grapes. But it was quite a messy business, crushing of grapes. You see, it's crushed by feet. Nowadays they have other methods of crushing it. But I remember in the old, not so long ago, days in the Cape area of South Africa. It's a wine-making area, and I was very lucky to go to school there. And in that area they had the huge festivals, days where everybody came together and they were crushing grapes. The crushing process. You see, pain and sorrow might come. It's part of wine producing. Pain and difficulty that might cross my path. And if it does, remember, God's making wine. And if you look back on your life and you see the scars of crushed grapes, the scars of pain, remember, it's part of God's making wine business. You see, wine needs crushing. Brothers and sisters, we can all testify to the crushing periods of our lives. It's bitter and excruciating pain caused by it is something we absolutely never want to relive. But God's making wine. And then the last, the fermentation. In God's vineyard, fermentation is very important. Without fermentation, there's no wine. Just cheap juice. Fermentation happens under the times of loneliness. It's left there in the cold. Maybe you find yourself there in the dry spell of life, a bit lonely. The letters and mail from home become less and you feel all alone. Times of quiet, times when nothing really happens. Time of separatedness. Remember, God's making wine. And then comes the bottling, the serving for the right moment. When God is making wine, it's an ongoing process. Making wine, pouring it out. And as God is busy making wine, he's busy bottling it, he's busy using it as he goes. And that is my message to you, brother and sister. In 2013, God will proceed with his business of winemaking in your life. We are all somewhere in his winemaking process. We may be new believers enjoying the miraculous connection to the vine, or perhaps we have ripened but suddenly challenged by a crushing process within some unforeseen wine press. Could we be stored in a cold, lonely place as we endure the unstable process of fermentation? Who knows? Be encouraged. The master winemaker whose exampling you are following will call upon your vintage to be used to share the joy of his kingdom. So what I'm saying to you, brothers and sisters, in 2013, it might be a very good year. It might be a year with its storms and with its loneliness, its coldness. But remember, God is making wine. He's making the best quality wine. He's making wine that can be served for a king. So if problems come and you feel you're stuck, you have no control over the circumstances, remember, God is making wine.